that there was a real place where he was, there was real time and real things that he did. And just to see what that mountain looked like that they would have gone up and where that transfiguration would have happened intrigues me, fascinates me. It reminds me of the concrete reality of the Savior that I worship and that I follow. I want to help us to think about what this transfiguration is and is doing by helping us think about one of my actually favorite books. This was the book that changed my reading habits back in middle school. I hated reading until I read this book. And I hated reading because I was such a slow reader. It was such a chore to read, and I had to work really hard at it. And I read in middle school The Lord of the Rings. And from when I started reading that story to when I finished, it was taking me over 5 minutes a page just to read a page. And by the time I finished, I was reading it about 2.5 minutes a page. And when I finished that book, I never turned back and would read about 2 hours a night on my own without my parents knowing. I would sneak into my room, and I was supposed to be in bed, and I had a light that I could turn on that they couldn't see was on. And I would stay up late into the evening reading past my bedtime because I fell in love with reading. But The Lord of the Rings is a powerful story. It was voted the book of the century for the last century. And it's a huge story with tons of races and people and things going on. But at the heart of it, the author, J.R.R. Tolkien, who was British, who was a professor at Oxford, who had lived through both World War I and World War II, was struggling with that book with huge questions. In fact, he wrote that book over about a 12-year time period, and he created the genre of fantasy that is one of the genres along with science fiction that many people love to read. But what he was doing in The Lord of the Rings was asking a profound question. And the question was simply this: will we lose sight of our humanity to our technology? And the whole book is to struggle with what does it mean to really be human. Now, he had elves, he had orcs, he had dwarves, he had goblins, he had all trolls kinds of stuff, people, races in this book. And what the book was about was a very evil being whose whole goal was to distort all that was good, all that was light, and bring about a reign of darkness and a reign of distorted evil and destruction, had created a ring of power that was the most powerful thing in all of Middle-earth, the land that he writes about. And that person had been defeated at one point and lost their ring, and had regained enough power to wage an attack to take over and destroy Middle-earth, and needed that one ring. And that one ring had been found by the most innocent of people, a hobbit, which was a halfling who loved to eat, was it 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 9 meals a day? I don't remember now. And loved to smoke a good pipe and to sit around with family and friends and drink a good ale, eat a good meal, and enjoy the meal, the company, and people. And had found this ring, and as the good people in the story came to realize their predicament and that there were huge armies mounting, began struggling with the question of this ring of absolute power, can we use it to fight the evil Lord and all the evil that's encroaching upon us? And as they struggled with the question, the ring would distort the people around it, making them want to start doing and acting in evil ways. But it raised a simple question. And Tolkien never said this in the book, but in Tolkien's mind, the ring actually represented the machine. And the question he was struggling with that whole time as he wrote The Lord of the Rings, because he lived through World War I and World War II, he saw incredible things of mass destruction invented and used to kill many people. And his whole struggle was, where were we going to go with our technology? Were we going to keep our technology as a tool that lends use, or are we going to let our technology take us over and change who and fundamentally what we are as humans and lose sight of our humanity? And as he worked it out, the whole story became a group of people who banded together in a fellowship trying to take that ring to be destroyed rather than to be used, believing that the only way in which humanity would survive is if the ring is gone rather than used as a tool itself of absolute power to destroy. And I don't want to spoil it for you, but as they go through this whole journey, this is the struggle of the journey. And what's interesting on this journey that is so profound, both in the book and in the movies that have been made about it, is in their darkest moments, the places where they find the most hope are in little gestures of friendship and companionship along the way. Like one of the most profound scenes is one of the enemy's strongholds who have been producing huge evil armies. It's overrun by a group of living trees because a couple of little hobbits convinced them to do it. And when the whole army shows up to help out, the hobbits are sitting on a wall with food spread out as far as you can see, smoking a good pipe that they found in the coffers after the enemy had been destroyed in their castle. And it caused their friends to just laugh because they realized what was important in life was a good meal with friends and sitting there smoking a good pipe afterwards. Now, I'm not advocating smoking good pipes. I'm just using that as an illustration. And drinking some ale they found from their homeland. So they were really happy in this moment. And what Tolkien weaves through this is the littlest and the least and the last become the key people that change events. And there's even a piece in the story that no movie is included, which is when all is said and done, the four hobbits who are on this journey, whose lives are changed, head back home to find their entire home being overrun and oppressed by an evil dictator. And the experience they gained in all the battles they went to, which hobbits aren't known for fighting, don't know how to wield swords or anything like that, but had to learn in the life circumstances they were in. They overthrow the dictator not because they want to use their newfound power and strength to rule. They overthrow the dictator so people can get back to farming, having a good meal, enjoying a good drink of ale, and smoking a good pipe with their family and friends. And there's something telling about how Tolkien envisions and walks through the whole struggle, because his answer is that he believes the salvation of humanity is when we remember the most important thing for us is the love of the people around us and the spending our time and caring for the people around us, which is the power of what's going on in this transformation piece. Because what we've been looking at in Epiphany is what Jesus was doing in the Sermon on the Mount. In that sermon, he's taking the law, and he says, you heard it was said, and then he tweaks it to the point where we crumble under it. And he realizes that God's chosen people were just struggling to the point of collapse because the religious leaders kept saying to them, the reason God hasn't sent the Messiah and fixed everything is because you're not moral enough. Not enough of you are being moral. Not enough of you are being holy. Not enough of you are observing the cleanliness codes. And we're screaming at them that you're just not being good enough people faithful to God. And that's why God has allowed the Romans to oppress us, to kill our own, to tax us to the point of exhaustion where most of us have had to sell ourselves into slavery. And it's because we aren't good enough people. And so here Jesus sees this and sees that what's going on is they're being told that if you just use the law and you get the law right, that you can control God and God will make things go well for you. And so he ratchets that law up to the point where we just can't do it. Because what he wants us to do is let go and cling to God in faith. And so he's pushing that law in a way to push us to let go of trying to control God. And to simply have faith in him and what he has done for us in the death and resurrection. And again, we're looking at a gospel which is written for you to read the whole thing and think about it all at once and not to read it linear. And so the whole story sees the ending of Jesus' death and resurrection as pivotal to the middle and the beginning. And so Matthew has been pushing us in understanding what Jesus was doing is to push his followers to get the need to cling to God in faith. And so we come to this Transfiguration passage, and what I believe is going on in this Transfiguration passage is Jesus goes up on the mountain where you have Moses, the giver of law. God gave law to Moses on the mountain. He radiated a bright light, came down and said, here are the 10 Commandments as the start of the law. Elijah, the prophets who judged how to understand the law and what was right and wrong, met with God on that mountain and radiated, is standing beside Jesus, and he's radiating a bright, brilliant white light. His disciples are terrified of what's going on, what they're seeing, and a voice from heaven says, this is my beloved, my son, who I am pleased with. Listen to him. Which is amazing, because God doesn't say, listen to the ones who brought you the law, or listen to the prophets, He says, listen to Jesus. And in that moment, Jesus is showing just those 3 disciples his glory, that he is from God, connected with God in a profound way. Then he goes back down that mountain and begins a ministry toward Jerusalem that becomes a ministry of suffering and death. And it's almost like what the Transfiguration really is saying to these few disciples, see, he is God. But he's not going to be the Messiah you want, which the disciples were hoping for, that's going to come with power and might, that's going to take that ring of absolute power and use that ring to drive out the bad. And instead he's going to come, and he's simply going to love and care for people and transform that world by simple relationships of loving, caring people. Just as 4 little hobbits transformed Middle Earth through the relationships they built, and their faithfulness to one another, and their faithfulness to wanting to go back home where they can sit around the fire and eat a good meal, drink a good cup of ale, and smoke a good pipe. And that all that this Transfiguration is trying to do is to, yes, say Jesus is God's Son, and God is well pleased and is to be listened to, but also to say that in listening to him, no, he is now going to show us the pathway to God, which is not power and might, not defeating our enemies. It is learning to love and care for not only our friends, our neighbors, but our enemies as well. It's about seeing the importance to God is the relationships we build. Not the things we achieve in this life, but the relationships we build in this life. And the people whose life we touch and allow to touch our lives. And so I think this transformation stays consistent with what Matthew has been doing and saying about Jesus and his ministry, and that it points us back to what Jesus is about, and that he is about pushing us to build meaningful relationships with people around us. The challenge this leaves for us is this: how do we trust God this week, each day, each moment? Trust that our faith in Jesus has justified us, that God's grace has brought us salvation, and that God's Spirit is empowering us to move in a different direction and to connect with people in different ways. And what are those specific ways in which we're going to do that? Some it may be as simple as saying, you know what, this would be a good week to pick up the church directory and just take 1 page a day and pray for each name on that page. For another, it may be, I need to pick up the phone and I need to talk and spend time talking with some people and letting them know I care for them. For another, it may be visiting someone. For another, it may be doing something for a neighbor. But it's about letting the Spirit of God work and move in us, and getting what the Transfiguration is about, and moving us to find new ways to care for the people around us. Let us make that our challenge this week. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, empower us to see your presence in our life, to feel and know you are with us and for us, so that we can reach out and bless others through your blessings for us, that we can find meaningful ways to touch and be touched by the people around us, and that we can love the way you first loved us through Jesus, your Son. Help us to see the possibilities you have before us, the ways in which we can love and serve others, and empower us to do so, and bless us in the process. We come to you with burdens on our heart as well, people that we care for who have needs, extreme needs, and we ask that you read our hearts and know those prayers. Hear our prayers, Lord.